This week on London Real, we have Rick Falkvinge of the Swedish Pirate Party.
As long as you follow the rules, you will always be, at best, number two.
The established politicians do not understand the digital environment.
The big problem today for a lot of creators, for a lot of artists, is not piracy, it's obscurity. Hollywood is not in trouble. They're posting record profits year over year over year.
We are fighting for things like the right to express yourself without being tracked.
You can see a lot of overlap between Pirate Party enthusiasts and Bitcoin enthusiasts.
They do not understand the internet, they do not understand that civil liberties need to be safeguarded more than ever.
First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. That's very, very accurate.
London Real presents Rick Falkvinge, Pirate Party.
Microsoft were absolutely terrified when they didn't see Windows 8 shared on Pirate Bay at all.
Happy New Year and welcome back to London Real. It's 2014. I hope you all have your New Year's resolutions in place. It's going to be a very big year. I got a funny feeling, and hopefully you've got a few of your goals laid out for you to make sure you get the most out of it. We are back with a gentleman by the name of Rick Falkvinge. And for all you Swedish out there, I hope I got the pronunciation right. I properly butchered it during this interview in the beginning, so you'll see that. He is the founder of the Swedish Pirate Party. And you might know the Pirate Party now because they have a major representation in Germany and a variety of other European countries. But at the time, they were the first. And it was a party, from what I understand, was founded on internet freedoms, piracy, and then was later loosely associated with the Pirate Bay, which if you're a Yank, you might not know that that's based in Sweden. And it's really fascinating to hear the way that Rick talks about it because of their incidence of such a high broadband standard back in the day. The Swedes really demanded to have a lot of the multimedia at their fingertips. And so they set up a lot of these companies that allowed you to download movies back in the day. He talks a little bit about Napster, which is something that I used to actively use, which really was one of the first file sharing pieces out there as far as a peer-to-peer. And then he talks about how it kind of grew to where they became a genuine political party in Sweden, and he was all of a sudden gone from computer kind of tech nerd guy into politician. So it's a very cool story. He's an interesting dude. He's got a lot to say about Bitcoin and some really fabulous life advice at the end. You know, every now and then people really drop some fantastic science when it comes to things they learned, lessons they learned. And one of the great quotes that I put in the trailer, which you might have seen this week, is he said, those that make the rules because they don't want you to change the status quo that basically put them in charge. So he says, always break the rules. And he says, if not, you're always going to come in second. And it's a great perspective. So you can say you heard it here first on London Real when you go out and bust up all those rules. So I hope you enjoy Rick. Please check him out on Twitter. And he's good friends with Annie Michon and Max Kaiser and all of the soon becoming regulars here on London Real. So that's all good. I want to give a super shout out to my favorite people on the west coast of the USA, which are the folks at Bulletproof. Yes, I continue to be bulletproof. I took a break when I was in New York City for a week, and I had regular coffee. And it's good to take a break every now and then, but as soon as I got back to the UK, I got back on the good stuff with the butter and the MCT oil, and I'm back. If you don't know, it's a way of biohacking yourself by having the right kind of coffee, prepared in the right way, and having a nice chunk of butter and MCT oil in the morning. And then you're bulletproof. They've also got a bunch of other exciting products, including their charcoal tablets, which I'll be showing off here on the show very soon. And you can get all of that stuff at their website, which is upgradedself.com. They've got a whole new back end, very efficient. They got lower shipping costs in the States, and you can get all their stuff in Britain as well. So go there, check them out. It's more than just a coffee company by a long way. Dave Asprey's got a fantastic podcast and I encourage you to check that out. He's cranking out 2 shows a week with some of the top people when it comes to nutrition, biohacking, you name it. So check them out. I appreciate them. We're big fans of their product, and they are big fans of our show. So good stuff all around there. And that's it. We got a few more exciting things coming this month. We've got Mr. Richard Viller, who is a doctor, but in Britain you don't use the word doctor when you say someone's name. You say Mr. This is the guy that went to Haiti after the earthquake. He goes in like 24 to 48 hours after a major disaster happens, and he's the guy, you know, operating on people, trying to figure out where the water source is. I mean, it's really intense. He's an ex-SAS surgeon. I mean, he's the real deal. He was on here before with Patrick Vickers about 6 months ago, and he just got back from the Philippines for that typhoon disaster, and we had him back in, and he walked me through, you know, getting the phone call when he was up in the Lake District in the UK to being flown in via Manila and right to the disaster site to operating on people. And it was really intense. It's one of my most intense episodes. It was just me and him. I don't think I looked at my notes once because I was just like asking him questions that came to my mind. So it's a really fun show. That'll be coming up soon, along with some other exciting stuff that we've got going on to keep things fresh on London Real. So there you go, kids. I will call it at that. I hope you guys are looking forward to a great year. And now I'm going to leave you with Mr. Rick Falkvinge of the Pirate Party. All right, let's do this. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. We're sponsored today by the folks at Bulletproof Coffee, which Rick has just sampled. It's coffee that's free of molds and toxins. I mixed it up with grass-fed butter, much to his dismay. I put in some brain octane oil, which is like the best of the coconut oil. I mixed it up, and boom. We now have a new fan, I believe. It's a great way to start your day. I do it instead of breakfast. It just makes my brain work well, and I don't kind of crash after coffee. You had a small bit, but you liked it, right?
I liked it. I mean, it was a very pleasant surprise. I didn't expect that.
Yeah, when the butter went in, you were giving me some strange looks, but that's understandable. But I just want to say thanks to the Bulletproof guys. They're big into biohacking. Check out their site, which is upgradedself.com in the US. You can order their coffee. And really appreciate their support on the show. My guest today is Mr. Rick Falkvinge. Is that right?
It's a Scandinavian name, so Falkvinge. But yeah, most Americans say Falkvinge.
Okay, I'll say it right. Falkvinge.
There you go.
Okay, Rick Falkvinge, that's awesome. You are a Swedish IT entrepreneur, and you are founder of the very first pirate party in Sweden in 2005. Let me finish. You are a worldwide speaker on internet liberty, the right to privacy. You're a proponent of Bitcoin, and you're the author of Swarmwise, which is the tactical manual to changing the world.
Yeah, a bit ambitious title, but yeah, I stand by it.
I can't wait to hear about it. Rick, welcome to London Real.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, it's great to have you. You know, you have a fantastic looking CV about all the things you've done. But one thing that stuck out in my mind was that your first computer was a Commodore VIC-20.
Yeah.
Is that true? That
that is true. I mean, I started coding at age 8, so I started coding on a VIC-20.
That dates you a little bit.
It does, doesn't it?
The VIC-20.
I mean, I'm old school. I coded on computers when you actually had to know them inside out to get anything done. But I think that gives you a bit of an advantage. I mean, if I were to start today, I would be so cuddled in by all of these environments that wanted to help me to start a code. In order to get anything done on those 8-bit old school machines, you had to know them inside out, and you actually had to get down to the metal to get even some scrolling text.
Right, and the drive was an audio tape drive, wasn't it?
The first one was, yeah. You could buy a disk drive for the same price as the whole computer.
My first computer was an Apple II Plus with the double floppy disk drives with the green screen. My daughter,
look at that.
Yeah, my daughter the other day, she uses an iPad, and I said, this was my first Apple computer. And I showed her a picture on Google Images, of course. And you know what she said? She said, ew.
Well, I can see kids of today saying, that's not a computer. This is a computer, like Crocodile Dundee style.
Yeah, that's a knife. Yeah. So it was a big box. My screen was literally green. There were 2 choices on the screen, green and black. And but I showed her some of the video games I used to play, probably the same ones you used to play. These old school crazy.
Yep.
Required a lot of imagination.
Yep. And you had 3.5 kilobytes of RAM to play with. So you couldn't fit a lot in there, could you?
No, but they were fun. They were still really fun and better than anything that was offered in, say, the arcade at the time, because there was adventure games and lots of
Right,
things.
and it was groundbreaking. I mean, even at age 8, I was absolutely thrilled by how this machine would respond to my wishes. I would press buttons and it would do exactly what I told it to do. So as I started going through my teenage years, I realized that, you know what, they may think I'm a geek and nerd now, but this is really going to change society, and obviously it did.
Right, and the sky was the limit with those computers, because unlike an Atari, or you couldn't really code an Atari, could you? But with the VIC-20, you could really go anywhere with it. But most people would find it too complicated to even jump in.
They might, but I mean, if I'm talking to people from that time, and I mention like the RQ vector of 0314, 0315, a lot of people will go very nostalgic.
Okay.
If I'm talking about hardware wired registers like D020, they'll remember all the tricks they'd pull on the screen and stuff.
Okay, so it's a good way to you to bond with those old school
Absolutely.
guys. Okay, I want to hear about the Pirate Party. First of all, it's a really cool name. You've got a really fascinating story. It happened in Sweden. Obviously, the first time I heard about the Pirate Party was actually when it was in Germany. So, I heard about it after the fact. But I wonder if you could walk us through how it all started, why you came up with the name, and what caused you to do this.
Sure. I mean, it's a bit of a long story, but I think you need to see how it developed to picture how it all grew. I mean, Sweden was very, very early in broadband rollout. We had fibers to apartments in 1998 and 1999. My apartment was fibered before the turn of the century. Most apartments out in Europe still aren't.
Right, okay.
So in this environment, Napster came about, and imagine what we used it for. I mean, Sweden was third in household bandwidth after Japan and South Korea by 1999. Wow. So it's really no wonder that the Pirate Bay appeared there, because when you give that kind of technology to not just to geeks and nerds, but to everybody, it kind of kickstarts a public discussion on how this technology should and maybe even could be used.
Okay.
So
now, for our younger listeners, can you explain what Napster was? I remember it.
Well, that's a good point, actually. I mean, Napster was the first large-scale file-sharing program. I mean, think of it as BitTorrent, but kind of old school. Mm. So what was new about that? I mean, this was with relatively very, very small hard drives, still sometimes measured in the megabytes instead of terabytes of today. So we were mostly sharing music. But what was revolutionary at the time was that we'd type an artist and a track, and we could immediately listen to it, like you do on YouTube today, but only we would get an MP3 to our hard drive.
Right, which was big back then.
Which was absolutely big back then. I mean, this was an evolution up from modem times, where you'd essentially not even use the internet, but amateur networks and share files between one another. So the idea of sharing your hard drive and pooling your music collection with thousands of other people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of other people, so that everybody had access to everybody's collection and just pooling it, was revolutionary at the time, and it was the beginning of large-scale file sharing. Today, 250 million Europeans and about 150 million Americans are doing that, much to the dismay of the copyright industry, but there's now putting the genie back in that bottle.
Right. So Sweden was an early adopter of Napster.
Right, right.
Napster never had servers there, though, right? Were there servers in Holland, or I don't remember?
I don't remember where they were. I just remember how this came out of Sean Fanning in Bay Area. But I don't even remember if it was the Bay Area. I remember it was.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, Sean.
Right.
So because of the broadband that you had in your country,
right.
it kickstarted this need
exactly.
and this want.
And if you look at sociological studies, you can often observe that shifts in values tend to follow the developments in technology. Mm. So, I mean, when the copyright industry established their lobby firm in 2001 in Sweden, which was called the Anti-Pirate Group. No, Anti-Pirate Bureau, the Anti-Pirate Bureau. Right. They were so late to the game, it was ridiculous, and everybody was laughing at them. But they still got some media, as in they were making ridiculous claims. What was funny about that was that a couple of musicians decided that they wouldn't take these outrageous claims lying down. So in 2003, a bunch of cultural workers and musicians founded a counterpoint to the lobby's Anti-Pirate Bureau. And what was what would be a better name than the Pirate Bureau.
Okay, all right.
So they would go really provocative, stating, isn't it great that we can all share music?
Right.
I mean, this is the best thing, this is the greatest library ever invented. And their points would go straight on media because this was a media logic hit. You would immediately have this point and counterpoint. So you'd have the debate format straight off the bat.
And because it was Sweden, you felt you had the right to this information because you had been sharing it for so long, for so many years.
I mean, you were talking about a VIC-20. That's when the sharing started. Okay. You were talking about how we'd used cassette tapes. I mean, this idea of having music on cassette tapes, the old cassette, everybody can look them up on Wikipedia. It was basically a small piece of plastic with a magnetic tape inside. Yeah. But, I mean, they basically don't exist anymore. But early on, we were storing computer programs on those too.
Right.
So if you were
going on,
I mean, if you were used to sharing music on cassette tapes, you would immediately know how to share computer programs on cassette tapes. The cassette tape players of the day even had a big red copy button. So you'd bring your original, you'd bring a blank tape, you'd pump them into two different slots, and you'd press copy. I mean, they were made for copying.
Right. Okay. So piracy's been going on for a long time.
Right. So the culture has been there since I basically learned to walk.
Okay. Now, the Pirate Party, how did that come about? And was that, I know that wasn't initially equated with, say, the Pirate Bay, one of those, but later you kind of became one. I don't know. How did that all work?
So the thing was that the Pirate Bureau had a smash hit with media. And they basically become heroes with the younger generation because they were speaking the net generation's language as opposed to the old stale people from Hollywood who were trying to peddle outrageous lies in media. So in 2005, there was yet another copyright monopoly harshening in Sweden, making downloading illegal if it wasn't from an authorized source. And I mean, how are you supposed to know if the source is authorized or not? We don't punish people who listen to the radio if the radio is unlicensed. We punish the radio. So this was a direct strike on independent artists, and politicians were too naive to see it for what it was. And this was discussed everywhere in Sweden at the time, in 2005. I mean, at universities, at family dinners, over coffee at workplaces, you name it. Everybody took part in the discussion except for one group, and that was the politicians. And that struck me as immensely odd, because the politicians are usually the one group in society that kind of hold their finger to the wind like this and see what feels important to a lot of people right now. So what struck me was that how can you make them understand that this is actually important to a lot of people? What would it take to make them realize that they even have a blind spot, because they don't know that today? And then I realized that they're not evil. They just do what everybody does when they don't know something. They ask around. And the copyright industry has just been very, very good at happening to be there when these politicians are asking around. So I realized you can't get on their agenda. That's not going to happen, because their inbox is filled to the brim with people demanding everything from a carbon tax on hamsters to help the environment, to tearing down that bridge that shouldn't have been built in the 70s anyway.
Okay, so they're not necessarily in the back pockets of the recording industry. They're just too busy.
Exactly. I mean, they're not evil. They're just doing their best to do a good job.
And who's lobbying for these efforts? Is it like this association that's funded by Hollywood and the recording industry that then goes internationally?
Yes. Okay. Absolutely, yes.
It's not a government organization, is it? Or is it?
There are some governmental organizations like the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, which I prefer to call the World Industrial Protectionism Organization. Okay. But in general, yes, it's just shills.
Okay.
So there you have it. I realized that you can't get on their agenda in their 9 to 5 time frame. You gotta go outside their box. You gotta aim directly at their power base. You gotta do something that affects them personally if you want to get their attention. So I figured the only way to get their attention was to stop trying to talking to them and instead head directly to the voters and challenge the politicians on election day over their jobs on this issue.
But you'd never been in politics before?
Well, I was partying with some I was partying with the youth league in my teens. I don't think that really counts as politics. That more counts like being a teenager.
Was the creation of this party a ruse, or was it something that was a ruse that turned into something real? Or when you actually did it, what were your intentions?
No, as in, I've done the math. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I founded my first company at age 16. I'd done the math.
Okay.
As in, yes, you need solid ideas, but if you're going political, then you need the numbers.
Okay.
I mean, politics is a public spectator sport. You need the quantity of votes, and that's harsh. If you don't get that, you fail. If you do it, you succeed. It's black and white. So
we had George Galloway in here, who was a member of Parliament in the UK, and he said politics was show business for ugly people. But then
what?
For ugly people. and then he said, but what would I know about that? But that's Galloway for you.
That's a bit cynical.
Yeah, it is. But I'm sorry. So you were saying, so it's a numbers game. So
right,
and it is a public opinion.
Right. So I mean, there were 1.2 million file shares in Sweden at the time. Okay. Now there's 4 million. But
out of a population of 6,
9,
8, 9. Okay.
Out of 9.
Okay.
So
that's
roughly half.
Okay, and these people probably vote, or they're younger.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So I figured if just 1/4 of these people are tired enough of being demonized like this by the entire establishment, as they were at the time. If just 1/4 decide that enough is enough, then we'll have a new party in Parliament. We needed about 225k votes to get there, and later in our breakthrough in 2009, we got 225,915 votes. So it turned out that my math and estimates had been very, very precise.
Okay. Just it lagged a few years.
It lagged a few years. I mean, politics takes a lot more time than I'd like it to do.
Okay, so how were those early days? I mean, and what happened in 2009?
Well, I started setting up the website late 2005, and it went online on January 1st, 2006. So in the early days, it was basically amateur hour. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But hey, that's what it's like learning a game, you know?
Right. It's a movement. It's a startup, really.
It's a startup. It's exactly a startup. I mean, all of my entrepreneurial skills were just went straight into the box. Okay. So,
and when did you, I guess not collide, but when did Pirate Bay become relevant, and how did that affect your party? And what happened, and what year was that? Just for a history lesson.
Right. I mean, the Pirate Bay was founded in 2003, and quite rightly, I must say, the Pirate Bureau and the Pirate Bay people were very skeptical of the Pirate Party initiative at first. I mean, was this a joke? Did we have the stamina to ride it out? Were we serious? Were we in this for the long haul, and did we have the capacity to deliver? So, having built quite a cult status around themselves and their argumentation, they were rightfully wary at first.
Okay.
But as time passed on, and they realized that we can play this game, we're serious about this, then we gradually grew closer, and we actually did something with the Pirate Bay after our breakthrough in 2009 when we put 2 people in the European Parliament. Before then, we'd been on completely separate tracks. But in 2010, ahead of the national elections, and this is kind of funny, the copyright industry were hunting the ISPs of the Pirate Bay quite relentlessly. Okay. They were basically just trying to smoke them out. So it took, on average, 20 minutes from the Pirate Bay signing up with a new ISP until they got the first threatening phone call from the copyright industry. That's when we stepped in. And I mean, we're tech savvy, right? We're geeks. We already had everything we needed to set up an ISP. So we did. We as the Pirate Party became the ISP, the Internet Service Provider of the Pirate Bay. And that was basically throwing the glove at the copyright industry, saying, come and get us if you want to give us a ton of attention ahead of the election. And they realized that's what it was, so they just backed down immediately.
Okay, this is 2010.
It is. It's ahead of a national election.
And is that when Pirate Bay was shut down or attempted to be shut down? Or?
The copyright industry attempted to shut it down, as they tend to do.
Okay, that was 2010, or is that something that happens every year?
Oh, it keeps happening.
Okay.
And I mean, they call themselves the most resilient torrent site in the world, and there's a reason for that.
Okay. Now, from now and moving forward, what are like the tenets of the Pirate Party? Is it all about just protect our we don't believe in copyrights or protect our right to information, or are there more things going on? Because now you have seats in the European Parliament. Germany has quite. I mean, it's quite a move. That's when I first heard about it. When I looked at the numbers, it was like a very large percentage of the vote they got. It was like
absolutely.
7 or 8%.
I know. I mean, in 2009, we became the largest party in the youth demographic in Sweden. I mean, we took 25% of the sub-30 vote, and that just came out of the blue for the establishment. In some polls, we were the third largest party, and coming from nowhere to become third largest in a proportional system in 3.5 years, I mean, that's a really big deal.
Yeah, it's unheard of. So what are the tenets of the party?
We got seats in not just the European Parliament from Sweden. We have seats in Germany, like I say, 45 seats in state parliaments. In the Icelandic Parliament, we have a senator in the Czech Republic, and we've taken seats a little here and there. So basically, if you're asking me what we stand for, it's something as simple as making sure that the civil liberties that we have offline carry over to the online world our children live in. And let me take an example to illustrate. When our parents sent a message to their friends or colleagues, they would actually write something on a physical piece of paper. They would take a pen and paper, write the message by hand, and put that piece of paper in an envelope, write an address on the envelope, put a stamp that cost money on the envelope for delivering this letter, seal the envelope, and physically carry that letter into a mailbox and put it there. And it would be carried by postal services physically to the recipient.
Okay.
Now, I actually feel I need to explain that because most people don't do that anymore.
Sure.
So when you did that letter had certain characteristics. First of all, it was anonymous. You and you alone would determine whether you identified yourself as sender of this. On the inside of the letter, for only the recipient to know. On the outside, for the entire postal service to know, or frankly, not at all. Or you could write a phony name. That was your prerogative entirely. It was untracked in transit. Nobody had the right, nor for that matter, the capability or means to track who was communicating with whom in real time. It was absolutely secret in transit. It was unheard of that you'd open all letters just to see if some letter contained a copied drawing, unless you were thinking of Stasi in the old East Germany, and we don't think of those in fond terms. And last but not least, the mailman was never, ever responsible for the contents of this message, which you can observe that the national post services are still each European country's largest distributor of narcotics, because they are not held responsible for the contents, and that's by design. We hold the sender and receiver responsible.
Okay.
Now, once you observe that these four were pretty much inalienable rights with the sealed letter, we are arguing that it's not rocket science that these four characteristics, these four civil liberties, should carry over into the online world of our children. Because we don't determine what civil liberties we have based on who gets to make a profit or not. That is on a different topic entirely.
Okay.
So when you say this when you say this aloud, in particular, the copyright industry tend to say that you can't be serious. You can't allow anybody to send anything to anybody else. We'd go out of business. And I say, so what? An entrepreneur's role is to make money given the current constraints of society and technology. You do not, as an entrepreneur, get to dismantle civil liberties just because you can't make money otherwise. Okay. That's not how it works.
Okay. And you're specifically talking to, say, the Hollywood movie industry or to the music industry. And you're saying they need to move past an old business paradigm? Is that kind of what you're saying? They need to accept the new reality?
Well, to be frank, I think the entire copyright industry is obsolete. So I don't think it's much use for me to talk to them. Because they'll hang on to this old construct where they've legislated their place in the market. But they don't add value anymore. I mean, seriously, we don't need an entire industry to ship us bits of data on stupid disks of plastic across the Atlantic. We can do that ourselves at the cost of a trillionth of a cent.
Okay, now that's distribution. Now I'm gonna hit you with the devil's advocate because everyone's gonna want to ask you this question. Sure. I'm a Hollywood studio. I'm about to make the next X-Men.
Right.
Don't ask me why I would go see that, but that's a whole different issue. That's past my generation. But I'm gonna spend $200 million on this film. The reason I'm gonna spend that money and produce these amazing effects and hire these horrible actors is because I'm going to produce this product that I obviously need to be paid for, need to get my 30% return, which makes me want to make the investment in the first place.
Right.
If my copyright laws are broken, then I don't want to make the investment. Therefore, you're not going to get the quality of the movies, and then it's going to break down. What do you say to that?
Right. So I'll respond in 3 levels to that. First, people have always created, not because we make money off of it, but because of who we are. You get 100 hours of video uploaded to YouTube, just to YouTube, every minute. So the myth that you need to make money to create is simply not true. That doesn't mean we don't think it's nice to make money creating, but the myth that we create only because it's a dull and boring job, that is a plain myth perpetuated by the copyright industry. It doesn't hold a shred of truth to it. The second question, the second layer is, Hollywood is not in trouble. They're posting record profits year over year over year. And that's despite the fact that file sharing is just growing, again, year by year by year. So the idea that what if people were copying freely, that is not a what if. That is what the terrain looks like. And we are trying to change the map to match the terrain. And third, a lot of these blockbusters make all of their investment and more back on opening weekend before it's physically possible to have a digital copy out in the wild. Meaning that, yes, we've seen the numbers. You can make the investment back. And fourth, we don't adapt civil liberties to maintain a certain form of culture. People have enjoyed different forms of culture for as long as we have written history. It was opera, it was operettes, it was musical, it was rock concerts, it was radio plays, it was TV shows, it was feature movies, and we're moving into video games. There's no hard and fast rule that we need to lock in legislation to make sure that today's preferred form of culture becomes the always preferred form of culture. That's not how it works.
Should there be any copyright period for someone creating, a piece of media?
Well, I'm skeptical to the concept, but we have to abolish all of it tomorrow is much too large a step to take, given how much inertia there is in the system. But we have a proposal that I think is reasonable, proportionate, and solves 99% of today's problems, which says that drive this monopoly, because it is a monopoly. It has nothing to do with the property rights. This is a monopoly, distribution and duplication monopoly that limits property rights. That's very important to understand. And
which is the monopoly?
There are 6 specific rights that are reserved for the copyright monopoly holder, regardless of whose property a copy of a movie is.
Okay.
I mean, if you buy a DVD at the supermarket, it's your property. You hold the receipt in hand. It's your property inside and out. Only different laws limit your property rights to this disc. That's why it's monopoly and not property right. But where was I?
I think we were talking about what you would like as far as a copyright law or a copyright proposal.
So we have a very reasonable proposal which says that push this monopoly back into where it was 15 years ago. It needs to concern itself with commercial distribution only. Frankly, this monopoly does not belong in honest people's bedrooms. It needs to get out of the civilian population. So reduce this monopoly to only cover commercial activity, meaning that non-commercial sharing, which everybody does today, should not just be legal, but encouraged.
Peer-to-peer sharing.
Peer-to-peer sharing, yes. Okay. The lengths of today's monopoly is ridiculous. I mean, they're ridiculous.
5 years? Are they 20 years? Or are they even further than that?
I mean, today it's life plus 70. Okay. And they're saying that this monopoly, the purpose of it is to incentivize, for example, an author to write more books. And that might sound fine until you realize that this if you write a good book, the idea is that you should have a monopoly on selling this book, so you get money to write more books if it's popular. But this monopoly lasts for the author's life plus another 70 years. And to be honest, I don't know of any writer that keeps writing books after they're dead and buried.
Okay.
So the monopoly lasts for at least 70 years too long.
Okay, and when you say monopoly, you mean that one person owns the rights to that media that they created. That's when you use that term monopoly.
Yeah, I mean...
Okay. What about Grand Theft Auto 5? It just came out. It was a huge hit. Obviously, people wanted the game. They bought the game. But if they go in and they're not going to pay the £55 for it and they can get it illegally free, now there's no opening weekend. There's none of that. Is there anything that says to you they should deserve some type of profit for making that game versus getting it for free?
You don't deserve a profit.
For making a game?
Nobody deserves a profit. That's not how it works.
Well, okay, but there's 500 people that created that game. Do they deserve to get paid a salary?
Well, if they deserve to get paid a salary, that's between them and their boss. But
they need some revenue to do
entrepreneurship doesn't work like you make a huge investment so you deserve a profit.
Not a profit.
That's a business calculation.
Okay, but
so I mean, the games industry is very, very, very special in that that they have only existed when sharing has been rampant. I mean, we talked about the VIC-20 and Commodore 64 recently, and when something was released on that, it took 3 days for it to spread around the globe from the release point. I mean, 72 hours. That's what you got when we didn't have the internet, when people were actually carrying copies by hand.
So you're saying this is just something that's been happening for a long time.
It's been happening through the entire games industry.
Right, and it hasn't, it's probably detracted from the revenue, but they're still making a great business. A lot of people want to pay for the media.
I'm not going to agree to the fact that it detracts from their business. I mean,
maybe it aids, you're saying. Maybe it helps their business.
Maybe it adds, maybe it detracts, maybe it's neutral. I'd say that depends that depends a lot on the individual business case. But there is absolutely no solid case saying for the fact that sharing is always a loss.
Yeah.
Today, a lot of culture, I mean, we've got such a huge supply culture. Like I said, 100 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube every minute.
It's not all great
How do you
video.
find the gems? I mean... The big problem today for a lot of creators, for a lot of artists, is not piracy, it's obscurity.
Right.
So you want to get your stuff out there. You want to get it to be known. A lot of software developers are horrified when they don't see their stuff shared, because that means it's not wanted.
Right.
Microsoft were absolutely terrified when they didn't see Windows 8 shared on Pirate Bay at all. No, because nobody wanted the stuff.
Okay, that's a very good point. It's funny because Game of Thrones, I think, is the most pirated piece of media.
Right,
but
and the producer loves it because that means that it's not a problem at all.
It's hot, and it probably builds their brand, and it probably drives people to HBO and drives people and all.
Completely, and I mean, HBO's subscription model fits hand in glove with piracy as an advertising model.
That's a very interesting point to make, one that that the critics don't often bring up. So no, that is a good point. Where is the pirate party in the UK? Rick, where is it? Do I need to start it?
There is a Pirate Party UK. The problem in the UK is that, I mean, let's go back to the original hack in Sweden. I mean, we were founded as a parliamentary hack, essentially. Right. We wanted to get 5% of the vote. And there are two-party blocks in Sweden, pretty much like Republicans and Democrats in the United States, only there are blocks of parties.
Okay.
And what we wanted to get was 5% as a wedge in between those blocks, because they're always very closely tied for power. And if we would have that wedge, both of those blocks would need our support to form the next government.
Right, it's a classic political scenario.
Exactly. We wanted the tiebreaker position. We wanted to be the kingmakers. And that would enable us to sit down and play who wants to be a prime minister. And since we've seen that these issues are plainly not important to the politicians. That's why they don't care about it. That's why they just listen to the lobbyists and do whatever lobbyists say. So they would give us anything we wanted.
Okay.
So the original hack depended on getting 5% of the proportional vote, because in most of Europe, if you take 5% of the national vote, you get 5% of the national seats. Right. And that's very important.
Not true in America or in the UK.
Exactly. Right. So in the United States, in France, in the UK, and a couple of other countries, the
majority gets everything, right?
Exactly. You have a constituency system where the winner takes all in a particular geographical area, a neighborhood, a county, it depends a bit. And in such a place, you need 34% rather than 5% to get a single seat, and that's a different ballgame entirely.
Okay.
But you have the European elections coming up in the UK, and they're proportional. So the Pirate Party UK is gearing up for those elections, and I think that'll be very interesting. I mean, they're held late May next year, pretty much 6 months out, actually.
Okay. All right. Watch that space for this. Why is Bitcoin something you talk about?
Bitcoin is fun.
It is fun as hell, and we've had Max Kaiser on here. We've had a lot of people talking about Bitcoin. I love to talk about it, but why is it such a big part of the Pirate Party?
Well, we're not talking about Bitcoin. Pirate Party is not having Bitcoin as part of its platform directly,
right.
But you can see a lot of overlap between
Yes.
Pirate Party enthusiasts and Bitcoin enthusiasts. Disclosure, I have a rather large Bitcoin position. I invested all my savings in it early 2011.
You did?
Yes,
you
I
were
did.
one of those guys.
I was one of those guys.
Did you just take the leap one day and you're like, this is going to happen? And
Yeah, I sort of looked at it, and I mean, it was so many new concepts at the time. So, okay, there's no central bank. What do you mean it's just math? What do you mean it's a transaction system? Do you mean I can actually transfer a value of a cup of coffee to a friend in India on a Sunday and they see it immediately? What do you mean the government can't seize the money? Okay, this is getting interesting. What if we put this together? And I put it together in my head and thought about it for the better part of a week, and then went, wow, this is going to hit. I'm going to take all my savings and put it into this.
how long did it take you to buy those Bitcoins? Like weeks to get your savings into that? Because it's hard to buy a lot of Bitcoins.
That's the problem, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
you have this
illiquid
you have
instrument.
this very much so. I mean, you have this legacy banking system, and you need to transfer money to an exchange in Slovenia or one in Japan to actually buy the Bitcoin. But once you have them, I mean, you have such a, like I said, the first time I had the Bitcoins in hand, I bought a little just to test it out. And I sent the value of a cup of coffee to a friend in India on a Sunday, and they saw the money instantly. They didn't see who it came from. They just saw the money. I knew I had sent it. So just seeing what didn't happen, I mean, I did not log on to a bank of any kind. I did not pay an international transfer fee. In fact, I didn't pay any kind of fee.
Yeah.
There were no bank holidays involved. There was no delay at all, actually. No government had the ability to seize the money.
No money
because
laundering
they couldn't
investigations.
see it in the first place.
Right.
So
No money laundering investigations, none of that.
right.
Right.
And you have micropayments that are enabled for the first time ever, because this is going to. What's interesting here is that in an economy, today you essentially have 4 layers of players. At the top, you have the government, which works in collaboration with a second layer, which are the banks,
Yeah.
to collect money and run the government. They collect money with the help of the banks to fund the government and hand out social security, fund the military, police, and various services in society. Beneath that, you have the third layer, who are corporations that are essentially just engines in the economy, and then you have the fourth layer, which are people who do the actual work. But what's interesting with Bitcoin is that corporations who are dependent largely on credit card companies today see a means to cut them out of the loop. And credit card companies typically take between 2 and 4% of every transaction. Every transaction.
Yeah, and sometimes a minimum fee, right?
Right. There's a minimum fee, and there's a percentage on top of that. So,
Which to the average person doesn't sound like a lot. But
Right,
if you
but
told
what-
that to a corporation, I mean, that's the profit margin of Tesco. I mean, like,
exactly,
that's a lot of money.
exactly. So when you're looking at a corporation that has a profit margin of between 3 and 5%, which is typical, and ask an executive, would you like to double your profit margin, sir? You'd kick out because they didn't believe you even had a believable proposition. But once you realize that this payment system is going to double the profit margin of corporations, they're going to jump at it. So initially, it'll be a competitive advantage for those who only deal in Bitcoin.
So the corporations will want the Bitcoin, you
The
think?
corporations will absolutely want the Bitcoin,
Okay.
because it allows them to split this gain in profit margin between them and the customer.
Right.
And that means the customers, us, can get a lot of expensive stuff for lower prices. So we will flock to the corporations dealing only in Bitcoin,
Right.
because they can get off lower prices. And so the competitive advantage will gradually phase out credit cards all over the market. And at that point, the banks are out of the loop,
We have a parallel show here at London Real called Silicon Reel, and we are right in Shoreditch with the tech community. And the big thing here is fintech. And we had a company on called TransferWise. The guy was the first employee of Skype. Funny enough, his name is Tavert Hinkris. And they're trying to quite simply cut out these huge margins when it comes to bank transfers. For even these startup companies to set up bank accounts. I mean, it's from the 1800s.
I know. I mean, if you want a horrible use case, I mean, look at when we're buying something from China today. The Chinese manufacturers are absolutely outraged at the legacy banking system. I mean, they have to wait between 6 and 8 weeks for payment, and they have to pay on the order of $100,000 to a bank just to channel the payment. Bitcoin just erases that.
Right. And it's interesting because these small companies are taking on these banks. And I worked in the banking industry for 9 years, and it's the constant innovator's dilemma. The young company wants to try it a new way. The old company wants to save and protect your profit margins. You don't even do it. You don't even really think about it. It's just like the banks don't want to move because this is a great business to be in. And and the young guys are trying to change it. The Bitcoin people, that kind. Now, and the banks probably don't even recognize it until someday they'll buy the company.
Right, exactly.
And they'll capitulate.
I mean, you have this heavily regulated finance, banking industry, right? And along comes Bitcoin, and it becomes this clash between what you can do and what the regulators think you can do, because the regulations were set up to protect the consumer, but that was 4 decades ago.
Right.
So you have this paradoxical situation where the regulations are actually preventing innovation. It's like Uber in Paris, the taxi company, or taxi similar to taxi company.
So Uber's trying to make taxis available to everyone, and then in Paris they're running up against taxi legislation.
Exactly. Okay. And in Paris, they've so outcompeted the legacy taxis that they actually were struck with regulations saying that they may not pick up a passenger until 15 minutes have passed from the taxi call. So they have to wait by the curbside for 13 minutes before they can pick people up.
Yeah, and that's a way is old school.
Right, and that's like how these old regulators see how they are leveling the playing field with the old inefficient dinosaurs, whereas in reality they are preventing innovation, they're preventing progress. So this is where I see Bitcoin coming in, because they don't basically care about regulation. The exchanges, the bridges to the old system are affected by regulation, but you can't really regulate once you go all Bitcoin.
Right. Now, Bitcoin, so you've been upfront with us. You have a big position in Bitcoin. You put all your money in Bitcoin. It's almost hit $1,000 a Bitcoin.
It is.
In the last few days. It's gone up quite a bit in the last...
Actually, it's past 1,000 bucks.
So it's gone 4 or 5 times in the last month or two? Or 3 times?
In October, it was at 109 at its bottom. So it hit 1070 today. So it's practically a tenfold in slightly less than 2 months.
And one of your Twitter followers tweeted out something today, said, at what price will it remain stable? And you said something like between $2 and $5 million of Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's what I estimate.
Most people would fall off their chair hearing $2 to $5 million dollars of Bitcoin. But why do you say that? And why is that possible for evaluation?
Well, a lot of people are just seeing the charts and thinking, how high will it go? What I'm doing is counting backwards. This is a transactional currency, and it is a store of value. As such, it is a product and a service competing on a very tangible market for stores of value and for transactional currencies. So what is the size of that market?
Right. And this is important.
And how big a market share can Bitcoin realistically take within a foreseeable time frame? Right. When you ask that question, then you come up with a market cap of Bitcoin total, and then you divide that by the number of Bitcoin in circulation by your estimated time. And seeing how Chinese are buying Bitcoin like crazy, I actually had to adjust this number upwards, but then you come up with a number of about $2 to $5 million per Bitcoin.
Now there's about 21 million Bitcoins currently outstanding.
There
right?
will be 21 million
the
bitcoins
cap.
outstanding at the end. Today we have about half of that.
About
12,
half of that.
12-ish.
Because when I used to hear about the Bitcoin story, I mean, I did the same math you did. When at $100 a Bitcoin with say 10 million outstanding, that's like what, $1 billion of total capital. I mean, that's not even the market cap of Apple. That's 100th of the market cap. So I was like, this can't exist because it's not big enough, like you said, to be a. But when you start getting up in the numbers you're talking about $1 trillion.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to replace international trade.
Right. So it has to get that big in order
Right,
to be
right,
a real
exactly,
currency.
exactly.
And since it's infinitely dividable, it doesn't really matter the actual number of Bitcoins.
It doesn't in the slightest. I mean, you're going to be
Right.
dealing in micro Bitcoins before soon.
So whether they're 10 million or 100 million, or it doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter. I mean, it's easily divisible to 16 decimal places today, and you can extend that as long as you
Right.
want.
What worries you about Bitcoin? Or what don't you like about it? Something you would change if you could redesign it.
Well, it's going to create a lot of turmoil. And I mean, we're talking about a world where governments can't forcibly collect taxes any longer, where they can't just swoop into your bank account and take what they like, but where they have to rely on making you sorry for not voluntarily paying what they would like you to pay. And we're a world where government can no longer look into your economy. They can't see your wealth, your debt, your income, your expenditure. You may report it to them, but they have to take your word for it. So
they always say on Wall Street, there's two sure things in life: death and taxes.
Right. And when you say this to a bureaucrat, they'll just blink their eyes, and then they'll do a double take, and then they'll come up with something. But we have to. You must create new laws for this. And I go again. You don't understand. You cannot. You can't. It would be like creating a law to change gravity. It is not technically possible for you to see people's wealth. And then they go blink again, and then they say, but we have to, repeat ad nauseam. So that's going to change a lot.
What about the regulation right now? I bought a couple Bitcoins before we had Kaiser on, and I bought them through BitBargain, and I went back there a few months later, and it wanted like photocopies of my passport.
Yeah.
It wanted a picture of me holding my passport.
Yeah.
I was like, what are you kidding me? So I didn't do that. But are they making it harder and harder to buy these things? Or
No, this is standard banking regulations.
Okay.
This is European Union, and I'm not sure if it's worldwide, but the European Union banking regulations have something called KYC, Know Your Customer.
Yeah.
And that means essentially that you have to provide proof of ID, proof of residency address,
buy a Bitcoin.
To buy a Bitcoin.
The first time I just transferred money from my account.
And to sell it.
Okay.
So this is when you run into legacy regulations. This is not Bitcoin per se. This is about if you're a financial institution and you want some protection from just having police essentially move in and close your business.
Okay, so will that prevail, or will people be able to trade Bitcoin without all of these disclosures?
That's the thing, right? This is only necessary for the bridge to pound sterling, to US dollars, to Swedish krona, to Japanese yen and whatnot. Right. Once you're in Bitcoin, doesn't matter.
Then you're fine. Okay.
Then you're fine.
And what do you see for
Let me provoke you another bit there.
Please.
I mean, today the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. And the United States dominance depends heavily on the fact that if you want to buy something from China, then you first need to buy US dollars and then exchange those US dollars for what you want in China. And that is essentially fueling the entire current dominance of the United States.
Wait, now why is that? Because the Chinese won't accept that currency, or the Yanks have all the Chinese currency, or?
Well, it's just an international standard.
Okay.
I mean, it's more or less agreed on that international trade happens in US dollars.
I don't think the dollar's going anywhere, just for the record.
And if you want to trace that back, it dates back to something called the Bretton Woods Agreement that happened after World War II, where
the U.S. had some power.
Exactly, and U.S. offered Europe very cheap loans in exchange for tying their currencies to the U.S. dollar, and there was gold involved and whatnot.
Yeah, Europe destroyed each other, and the U.S. walked in and said, "We're going to take
exactly."
It was a perfect
So,
scenario.
and it was very profitable for the United States. But this position is threatened by Bitcoin. So, I think Bitcoin as a technology has the potential to change the world a lot more than the internet did. And I realize that's a bold statement.
Big.
But let me give you the third picture of this. I mean, I've said already that governments stand to not be able to collect taxes. That will cause a huge change. The United States' dominant power caused by their currency to be the international standard of trade, is that dominance is threatened by Bitcoin. And that's going to be a huge change. But the most interesting change is that all the geeks who went into Bitcoin early are going to be billionaires.
That is scary.
And I mean,
You're talking about yourself too.
That's a possibility.
You'd be like Kim.com, like a billionaire mogul.
I won't. I'm going to be honest. Yes, I might be one day. Okay. I might be one day.
So
I'm not today.
Where's that corollary? Continue.
So the interesting thing is that the wealthy people of today are the ones that went into oil early in the 1800s. The same way people are going into Bitcoin early today. The ones that went into oil early are the ones that accumulated huge wealth. I mean, Rockefeller had over 1% of the wealth in the entire United States. You couldn't talk about the 1% because Rockefeller had more than that. He wasn't even the 1%, he was the 1.46%. He alone.
All of him.
All of him,
okay.
right. So
there were no others.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So every project, every funding, every innovation since has been green-lighted or red-lighted by heirs of the oil barons. The automotive industry and the oil industry has basically decided where humanity goes.
Interesting.
What happens when this wealth shifts to the geeks and nerds? What happens when the hacker spaces decide where humanity goes, which projects get funded? And that's going to be interesting.
That's creepy. You know, you got some really interesting light on you right now. When you were telling me this, I went into this science fiction piece, and I was like, Jesus, you're freaking me out, Rick. There's going to be all this like totally geek squad, and they will literally be running the world.
Right, and it's not going to be about who creates the better battery-powered car. It's going to be who spends the most money on teleportation.
Right. That's pretty creepy. Okay, so that's going to be the future of Bitcoin. I don't think the dollar's going anywhere for a while, but I do think
not for a while.
That this has,
but it undermines the fundament
and has a very unique way of threatening it. I mean, taxation to America. I mean, it's the backbone and the bread and butter of that country. And as inefficient as they are as a bureaucracy, they will find you if you don't pay your taxes. So
right, they will, and they'll make you sorry for not paying your taxes.
Yeah.
The difference is they can't swoop in and just take them without asking you.
Right. Right, it's fascinating. All right, I want to shift gears a bit, and I want you to tell me something I don't know about Sweden. You know, we've seen the girl with the dragon tattoo, and most people haven't visited, especially the Americans listening. What is Sweden like? What is it not like?
You know, I worked for Microsoft for a couple of years.
Okay.
In my defense, I didn't apply to work for Microsoft. The company I worked for was bought out by it. Okay. But on the other hand, I got a great project management training at Microsoft, so I'm not complaining. They took very good care of the employees, at least at that time. But the Americans I worked with had 3 key takeaways described in 3 Swedish words. It was fika, which is a Swedish word that can be anything from a corporate meeting to a date. And it's when you sit down over coffee. And this happens at least twice daily for most Swedish.
Okay.
And it has such versatility that it's just a meeting of minds or a romantic date or anything like that.
Okay.
The second word is lagom, and it doesn't really translate. What it means is that everybody has a sense of community, so they contribute enough and take away enough for the community to continue. So lagom means that it's if I were to translate it, it would be something like not too much, not too little. Use your gut feeling for what is appropriate.
Okay.
And there's no such thing in the United States, nor is there something like that outside of Scandinavia. Oh. That is also a bit anti-entrepreneurial. I mean, it can go overboard and say, if somebody steps up and say, I can do this much better than anybody else, which would be the American dream and the American way, and to be honest, a little bit of my attitude, then it tends to be looked down on in Sweden.
Okay.
Because it goes outside of these cultural norm. The third one is sambo, and it literally means somebody you live together with. And marriage is kind of being phased out in Sweden. You're just moving in with your respective other, and that's it. People don't get married as they did 40 or 50 years ago. you move in together, you have kids, you live as if you were married, and maybe you do get married some 10 or 20 years later. But there's a legal framework in place to protect you the instant you move in together as a couple.
Okay. And that's what the Americans saw that was very different.
Right.
And the first one...
those three words were their takeaways.
The first one is that of the people are taking the time to just have a one-on-one meeting of the minds. Like, it's important for them to sit down and have that conversation, communication.
Absolutely. I mean, it's social, it's corporate, it's competitive. It's you can even hammer out business deals over a fika.
Okay, but it's in person.
Always in person. Always in
online.
person. Always
Okay.
in person.
Interesting. All right, those are they're very interesting 3 words. What about the movies? Do they do you guys any justice? The Dragon
Wow.
Tattoo movies? I prefer the original myself.
Oh, you've seen it?
Yeah.
I mean, the original one in Swedish is harsher, a bit darker, a bit more unpolished, perhaps.
Right.
In a positive sense, that it's not as friendly.
Right.
But yeah, I mean that is Swedish society very very much.
Okay.
Although you wouldn't see those misogynic parts.
Okay.
I mean they're very exaggerated, and while they do exist, it's it's rare to the point where you don't encounter them.
Okay. And Daniel Craig, did he do it justice in the American remake?
To be honest, I haven't seen the American
Look at
remake.
you. All right, that's a good answer. Rick, there's a question I always ask all of our guests, and I'm going to hit you with that same question.
Hit me.
If you could make a phone call to the 20-year-old Rick and give that young man a bit of advice, what would you tell him to do?
Buy Bitcoin in 2009.
Okay, that's good advice. What else would you tell him? What was he doing? Were you starting companies?
Okay,
What
so
were you
pulling
doing
a bit
then?
of life advice.
Yeah.
Obviously, you want to know the stock market ahead, so that's not very surprising, is it? I have a motto saying that, and this took me a while to flesh out, but my primary living rule is that if you play by the rules, you will always lose, because the rules were written by somebody else to maintain the status quo, and a part of that status quo is that they maintain their position. As long as you follow the rules, you will always be, at best, number 2.
Wow, that's powerful. And have you always lived your life that way?
I think I always have, but on the other hand, I think I articulated it fairly recently.
Okay, I like that one.
So
Although,
if you follow the rules, you will always lose.
is there a limit to breaking rules?
It's not as much breaking them as ignoring them, as in not accepting the framing of reality that these rules impose on you. Again, Bitcoin is one example that, no, we're not going to open a bank. We're going to dropkick the entire banking system. We don't care about the banking system. We're going to create a new way of trading. The Pirate Party was one such non-acceptance of the rules.
Right. You just don't even agree to any of the assumptions that make their arguments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So instead you put on your entrepreneur's hat and think, I can do this better. If I weren't bound by the rules, assumptions, and constraints of the day, how would I build this?
I like that a lot. Best advice you've ever received?
Wow. There's so much, to be honest. But one of the better advice insights I had was that don't worry if people don't like you. If people don't like you, it's because you're making a difference, and people don't like people who make a difference. People like others who maintain the status quo. If you're standing up for something, and you should, that means that some people will like you, some people will dislike you, and that means you're on the right track to something. I think you could quote Gandhi on that, actually, who said that first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. That's very, very accurate.
Did you get that advice early on, or was that something you realized later?
I probably came upon it later and realized that, yeah, this matches my experience.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I mean, you have to have some people hating on you, or you're not doing something right.
Exactly.
That's what I think.
When people lash out at you, that's a sign you're on the right track.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes though, especially if you're new to the game and you're getting lashed out. It can be not a nice experience at first, but that's good advice. The last bit of the advice question, you're making it through the gauntlet, is to the 20-year-old listening right now, wherever in the world, China, America, UK, Sweden. What advice do you give them, whether if they want to grow up and be like Rick or if they want to get involved in the Pirate Party? What advice do you give them?
Whether you believe you can or cannot change the world, I think you're right. It's all in the mind. It's about whether you accept the limits placed on you or you don't accept those limits. And the instant you realize you don't have to accept the limits put upon you by others, it's such a liberating experience. It's like finding cheat codes to life. I mean, you can start ignoring pretty much a lot of the rules and regulations and you feel untouchable. It's literally like feeling you found the cheat codes to life itself.
I'm thinking about that right now. I'm going to think more about this later. That is very good stuff. What are you doing then in the next couple of years? What's next for you, Rick?
So what I really enjoy doing right now is traveling and speaking. I mean, I led the Pirate Party, the Swedish Pirate Party, the first of 70 Pirate Parties, for its first 5 years. I led it into the European Parliament, and that electric victory night dinner was the night of my life. I mean, the roof lifted with the euphoria as we saw that bar up on screen and really realized we made it.
This is 09.
This was 09.
Okay,
this was
so
09.
4 years after, 4 years you've been working on that.
Right. So I pulled the Pirate Party through another national election that we didn't make. I learned a lot from that failure, though. So there were no hard feelings in that regard. And then stepped down to focus on what I really enjoy doing, which is traveling and speaking. I mean, I love igniting that fire in people's eyes as they realize they don't have any limits. If they have a passion for doing something, it could be bringing clean water to 1 billion people, teaching 1 billion people to read, bring humanity to Mars, whatever. It's totally doable. And I really enjoy people when I speak about this and make people realize that they can do it. I mean, I wrote this book, Swarmwise, which we mentioned briefly.
What is that book? This is Swarmwise, the tactical manual to changing the world.
Right.
You're going right into it. So what is that?
So one of the key takeaways from our putting people in the European Parliament was that we became the largest party for people under 30 in Sweden in the European elections. That was just a drop kicking of the entire establishment. They didn't see that coming. Everybody's gunning for the youth, but we became the largest out of nowhere. And what really strikes me was that this wasn't just any competitor. We had a campaign budget total of 50,000 euros, and the combined competition had 6 million between them, and we beat them. That means that we had a way of working that had a cost efficiency advantage of more than 2 orders of magnitude. We're not talking about shaving a few percent of the cost here. We're talking about being more than factor 100 more efficient. So Swarmwise, the book, is my experience with how you build such an organization, how you gather volunteers and energize them to change the world for the better. You want to make a difference? Then why are you still sitting here? Come along. I'm standing up. I'm going to change the world. Who's with me? And that's leadership at its core. And what I'm writing about is leadership is not something you're born with. It's a skill everybody can learn. And these very tangible methods that I describe in Swarmwise shows how anybody can stand up, decide to change the world for the better, and get those tens of thousands of volunteers that make it happen.
Okay. Do you miss tech? Do you miss being an IT guy? Do you miss being a startup guy?
Oh, I still code. I mean, I code on a pretty much a daily basis because I just think it's too fun to let go of.
Okay, but you're going to be doing the speaking. I've actually sat and talked to a lot of entrepreneurs that have the same story that said you do. They love making the companies. They did a bunch of companies, but they really get a lot out of inspiring other people. Uh-huh. You sound like that's where you're at right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I started coding. Like we discussed, my initial motivation was making these machines work for me, and they were so shapeable into whatever I wanted them to do. But as somewhere around age 20, 25, I found out that what I really enjoy doing is making people stand really tall about what they've accomplished, as in turning problem companies around from where you have people who have a slightly hulky stature and are kind of ashamed of yesterday's mistakes, and you turn that around to making people feel pride in their workmanship. And it's a complete turnaround. And I mean, I can live off of a year of making people realize that they're actually very skilled craftsmen.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. The last thing I wanted to ask you is, you're one of two people that send me PGP encoded emails every single time. It's you and former MI5 agent Annie Michon. Every time I get the PGP going, I know it's one of you guys. So I wanted to know, just as a close here, what do you recommend people do as a basic for privacy? Should they use the Tor browser? Should they PGP their emails?
Wow.
Just basic stuff.
I mean, the information hygiene is such a huge field today.
Oh, nice term.
Basically, what you want to do is to be aware of who else is going to see this information? Who else are you sending this information to? A lot of people, for example, when they enter their PIN code on an ATM, are not aware or don't consider the fact that they're not just entering their ATM to the bank. They're also entering it to the ATM, and anybody who wrote that ATM can listen to it. So when you're sending an email, you're letting everybody in the way see that email in the chain of delivery. So when you're browsing a website and entering your personal details, it's not just the website you're giving that information, it's the entire company behind it and all the coders there. So,
and the NSA now as well.
Well, and the NSA now as well. So my basic advice would be to start thinking about who else can see this information, and go from there. Like when you enter a PIN code on an ATM, do you know that it's not taken out? No, you can't. There's no way of knowing that. And once you realize that you can't know if it's taken out, then you start making sure that it's not possible to take it out. And that's when you start encrypting your email. That's when you start not communicating over unencrypted channels at all. So if I wanted to recommend 3 specific pieces of software, it would be for the people who use Android phones. It would be 2 pieces of software from Open Whisper Systems. They're called Text Secure. It's encrypted text messaging. And it's Red Phone from Open Whisper Systems, which is encrypted phone calls. And that lets you not worry, because if I make a Red Phone call to you, then I know that my phone is encrypting the phone call and your phone is decrypting it. I don't have to worry about who's listening in between and what are they going to do with what I'm saying. Same thing with Text Secure. And the third would be, if you're sending sensitive stuff in mail, then use, well, PGP would be the standard today. It takes a while to get used to, but yes, like you say, once you set it up and once you have it as part of your routine, then it becomes totally transparent. Okay. So yes, I always sign my email digitally, and I don't even have to do it because my setup takes care of it for me.
Okay. And Tor browser, is that a standard for you?
Not yet. I think it's a very good idea. Okay. But as it is, I turn it on only when I need to be anonymous. That's a problem, arguably, because the default should be encrypted. It shouldn't be that you turn on encryption when you need it. It should be that you turn off encryption when you're absolutely sure you don't need it.
Yeah.
So we need to move to a state of default privacy. We're not there.
Okay. Rick, thank you so much for coming. It's been
so much.
an enlightening hour, to say the least. You had definitely some interesting perspectives. The one especially that's going to hit me is going to be all the wealthy Bitcoin people in the future. I got to think about that. That and not agreeing to the rules of any kind of even an argument, to not accept their.
Right. There's a lot of implicit framing that's going on, and once you start looking at it, you you realize how much you can step out of it.
Well put, implicit framing. How do people get a hold of you? Twitter? How do they buy your book, Swarmwise? How do they find out more about Rick?
Swarmwise is easy to find. It's Swarmwise, one word, 9 letters. You can download it off my website for free if you want it in PDF format, or you can buy it off of Amazon or a number of other book sites if you want it in paper format.
Okay.
On Twitter, I'm Falkvinge. That's Falkvinge, 9 letters, just my last name. And on my blog, falkvinge.net, falkvinge.net, you can find a lot of other ways to contact me if you like.
And on your Twitter, you got the eye patch as the picture, right?
Yes, I got the pirate eye patch, so you'll know it's me immediately.
Do you still wear that every now and then? Or
It's just a photo gig, but it works, right?
It's powerful.
It's one of these silly little stunts that, there's the pirate, and people recognize it immediately.
Yeah, that's very smart. Rick, thanks so much for being here. I wish you well on your speaking tours.
Thank you so much for inviting me to the show, Brian. Real pleasure.
My pleasure. I hope we get a proper pirate party going on in the UK. We got the European Parliament elections coming up soon, so let's do that. I hope you make billions on your Bitcoins. We're going to be watching this market. It's fascinating to me too. So as we say at London Real, it's about the journey, and I hope we see you again soon. Take care. This week on London Real, former MI5 intelligence officer turned whistleblower, Annie Machon.
What we're looking at now is a de facto police state. All the laws are in place, they're just not being applied to most citizens yet. I think it's not a case of having anything to hide, it's having a case that I have a right to privacy, and I can't guarantee my government will uphold that right, therefore I need to take the steps to do it.
She talks NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden.
He would die for his country. He wants to try and improve the way his country operates within its own boundaries and protect its citizens. And we seem to forget and think that human rights are a luxury. They're not, they're fundamental, and privacy is one of them.
On Sunday, London Real presents Annie Machon, whistleblower.
So it's a very British mess, is the short answer.